Welcome to the traumatic brain injury and the Catch-22 conditions of community supervision chat. We're having a panel discussion today. My name is Tanya Bowman. I'm joined by my colleague Suda, and we will be the moderators for this session. Before we get started, we're just going to review some quick housekeeping notes, and then I will introduce our speakers and begin the session. First, you'll notice at the bottom of your screen, there is a chat feature. You can use that to submit questions. If you do have a question, we ask that you type the word question followed by the person that the question is directed at in the panel, because this is a panel discussion. And that way, when we're scrolling through the chat, looking through the questions, we will be able to direct it better. If you could do that in the chat before your question, it just helps us so much easier find those questions that you're asking. We will do our best to ask or to answer as many as we can during the time that we have. It's probably going to go by quite quickly today. We do again ask that you leave your microphone on mute until we get to the Q&A portion of the session, which will be at the end of the session. We are also recording this session, and this will be uploaded to the conference website for future viewing by those who have registered for the conference. This will be accessible to anybody registered for the conference for 90 days following. Okay. If there are documents that need to be given, we will hopefully be able to place them in the chat. If we cannot place them in the chat, they will be placed into the session page. That's where the links will be found, okay? There's also going to be an evaluation at the end of the session. It's quite short. We do appreciate your feedback, and we do use it to inform future events, such as this conference. Lastly, we would like to respectively ask that all of you attending today's session engage with each other thoughtfully and respectfully. Consider the impact of your words and the interactions with others. As moderators, we will not tolerate abusive or inappropriate behavior, and we will ensure that anyone who engages in such behavior is removed from the session. So going forward, I'm going to just introduce our panel speakers for today. I just want to come back to the room here. So first we have, and this is going to be in order of their speaking. Flora Matheson, she's a scientist at Unity Health in Toronto. Arthur McLuhan, a senior research associate, also at Unity Health, Toronto. Linda Ogilvie, the director of corporate healthcare and employee wellness with the Ministry of the Solicitor General. Anita Desai, she's the executive director of St. Leonard's Society of Canada. Patricia Pagnani, Program Director for Toronto Bail Program and co-chair of the West Toronto HSJCC Group. Mary Crawford, a justice advocate for mothers offering mutual support. Veronica Pepper, acquired brain injury system navigator for Hamilton, Niagara, Haldimand, and Brant area. Connie Coburn, also an acquired brain injury system navigator for Champlain. And Katie Almond, retired probation and parole officer and knowledge user of this program. So thank you all and welcome. We'll get started. I'll hand it over to Flora.
Thank you, everyone. I'm not going to speak very long right now, but I'm going to hand it over to Arthur to lead us into the topic of the day, and then we're going to lead into our panel discussion. And thank you all for being here today. It's a pleasure to be here to talk about this really important topic. Thanks. Tanya and Arthur, I'll lead it over to you.
Thank you, Flora. I'm going to set the stage for the panel discussion by providing some background. If you do next slide, please, Flora. We know that justice-involved populations contend with a variety of complex social and health needs. Secure housing is often the principal immediate need, but poverty and the lack of affordable and supportive housing contribute to high rates of homelessness and housing instability. In addition to housing challenges are serious mental health and substance use concerns, as well as high rates of childhood trauma. While many of these challenges are well known, traumatic brain injury, a hidden health concern, one often without visible signs of impairment, is associated with these challenges and increases risk of criminal justice involvement. TBI is defined as damage to the brain caused by an external force, such as a blow to the head, a fall, a motor vehicle collision, or sports-related injury. TBI has a global lifetime prevalence of 8.4%, but the prevalence of TBI is much higher among justice-involved populations, with rates as high as 85%. The associated challenges of TBI may explain higher rates of justice involvement. After experiencing TBI, people may have trouble in several domains that may make them more vulnerable to negative interactions with agents of the criminal justice system, including trouble with cognition, trouble with communication, and trouble with emotional and behavioral regulation. Interactions with police, frontline workers, probation and parole officers, judges and lawyers involve complex social interactions that require high-level, fast-paced processing of information, understanding, and responding. Research has identified that impairments in working memory and speed of processing are the main issues that compromise comprehension in these contexts. Increased anger, impulsivity, and irritability can also create challenges in these contexts. Together, these challenges can make complying with the court-mandated supervision conditions associated with bail, probation, and parole difficult or impossible for people with TBI. And yet, awareness of TBI remains elusive in the criminal justice system. In interactions with the police, with correctional officers, with probation officers, TBI-related challenges can be misinterpreted as willful noncompliance, defiance, aggression, and disengagement, all of which can perpetuate justice involvement through breaches, additional charges, rearrest, and reincarceration. That provides some background into the focus of our panel discussion today. And with that, I'll turn it over to Flora and the panelists.
I'm trying to use my finger to take me off mute, but that won't work. Thanks, Arthur, for that introduction. That's great. So we have a really great expert panel session today. We have a real mix of people that can speak to different contexts. And I'm not going to waste any time because we don't have a lot of time to speak today. And what I want each of the panelists to do, what we've asked them to do, is to talk about a particular challenge that they've faced in their work context, what strategies they've used to address those challenges, and if they have an example, to talk about those examples or an example that they have, because I think that would help us visualize exactly what those challenges are and how they face those challenges, and really to understand, the challenges of traumatic brain injury, the challenges of community supervision across different contexts in the criminal justice system. So to start us off today is Linda Ogilvie. Linda.
Hi, thank you. Thank you very much for inviting me to the panel. I wanted to first of all set the context for the provincial correctional system. In Canada, we have two separate systems. We have a provincial system for those who are remanded or before the court or sentenced to less than 2 years. The federal system is sentenced individuals for sentences over 2 years. In the provincial correctional setting, in Ontario, there are 25 adult institutions across the province. It's a mixture of jails, detention centers, and correctional facilities. We house predominantly remanded inmates, and that we have approximately 75% of the population being before the court still, and so technically not sentenced and not found guilty. The size of our facilities range greatly from 20 beds up in Fort Frances to over 1,600 beds at Toronto South Detention Centre, and the infrastructure varies from very old to fairly modern. We have one women's only detention centre, and that would be the Vanier Centre for Women, located in Milton. Each facility has a complement of healthcare staff. We have over 800 healthcare staff, predominantly nurses, throughout the province, and each institution has fee-for-service contract primary care providers, physicians, and psychiatrists. We have 4 infirmaries and a number of other services available, including psychology, social work, and addiction counselors in institutions. The average age of people in custody is approximately 34 to 35 years old. And as I said, we're predominantly a male-oriented system with 1 in 10 people who are incarcerated identifying as male. That's all right. So to think about the patients that we're looking after in custody, many of them have not been connected to care prior to admission for a variety of reasons. So often they come with a number of health anomalies which are poorly controlled. We know that people in custody have less attachment to primary care, and that would be your physicians in the community, and a much higher emergency department utilization. Generally being a poor physical status, we have, chronic disease such as COPD, liver disease, heart disease, and traumatic brain injury being really prevalent among the population. We have a number of other social conditions which affect the care we give, most predominantly those of mental health and addictions. And although you'll see varying statistics, and even in this conference, you'll hear about, 40% and 45% rates. The rates, in fact, of people who are mentally have mental health issues are indeed much higher than that. We typically don't have a system that captures that data accurately at this point in time. So I think one of the main challenges we're faced with as a system is transitions into and out of custody and how to manage people's care. As I said, people who come into custody are often of poor health for a variety of reasons. And one of the things that we know is that their stay with us is typically very short. The average length of stay for people who are on remand is 60 days. However, the median is actually less than 7, and 25% of those are with us less than 3 days. So it's a really big challenge for us to get to know people. We also have fairly old information systems. We're still relying on a hard copy file, so we don't have ready access to historical information, although that is changing with an electronic medical record, which we hope to implement in the new year. Getting the appropriate screening and assessments done, and then the connection back to care in the community remains a large problem for us. We have a strategy looking at transitions in care, most specifically the healthcare pillar, where we're hoping to connect people who are vulnerable directly with primary care at the release. That is a work in progress, and we hope to see the first case carrying of that particular initiative in January. And I'm going to turn it back to Flora.
Thank you, Linda. Thanks for that update on what's happening at the provincial level. We'll turn it over to Anita now. Anita, please give us an update from your perspective.
Thank you, Flora. So can I just double check that everybody can hear me okay? Good, okay. So I'm really pleased to be with you here today. Generally speaking, I'll just be bringing a perspective as a national organization. So for more than 55 years, St. Leonard's Society of Canada has been bringing together a network of individuals and organizations to collectively address the needs of people involved in the criminal justice system. Beginning with supportive housing, we work together to advocate for safer, healthier, and more inclusive communities. Our position on advocacy related to healthcare and corrections are kind of grounded within national and international standards on human rights. So for example, meeting the minimum conditions related to healthcare within the Mandela rules, the Canada Health Act, and the Corrections and Conditional Release Act, which is ultimately what governs the provision of healthcare in federal correctional institutions. So that act sets out an obligation for the Correctional Service of Canada to provide all incarcerated people with essential healthcare and reasonable access to non-essential healthcare that meets professionally accepted standards. So we've recognized the necessity of ensuring that incarcerated people are provided with care that meet these recognized standards that respect and protect human rights. But frankly, through an examination of the crux of addressing the varied and unique challenges of that system, it has become imperative through our work as a national organization that SLSE works with decision makers, service providers, and other stakeholders in our justice system to understand and advocate for the provision of equitable and consistent standards of healthcare that promote safe transitions from the institutions and incarceration into the community. Unfortunately for us at a national level, for well over a decade, healthcare and conditions of confinement have consistently been the top two areas of complaint by federally incarcerated people to the Office of the Correctional Investigator. And in disaggregating those complaints, there are disproportionate impacts on Indigenous peoples, Black people, and people of color. More recently, we learned that the Mental Health Commission of Canada is doing a national action plan on mental health in the criminal justice system. And there's some great people advising the commission on this work. SLSC's members took the opportunity to consider some recommendations to that advisory group, and the specific challenges included insufficiencies with discharge planning, adequacy of assessments and diagnoses, how mental health evolves during the transition period between release from the institution to the community. So just that fact that transition takes a bit of a toll on people. And of course, post-release, there are challenges with being able to access Correctional Services of Canada psychologists for mental health services and or psychiatrists to manage medications, the continuity of medications in the community. Quite often it's short-term support, and there are challenges in getting community-based health practitioners to work with the residents that our members support. So we provided some recommendations on all of these areas to the Mental Health Commission of Canada, and we're looking forward to seeing how they will frame their action plan in the long run. But generally speaking, when we talk about community integration post-release, our intent is to engage in activities that seek to improve the quality and accessibility of healthcare in Canada's criminal justice system, so as to contribute to broader, longer-term improvements across the continuum of healthcare systems that intersect with both public health and safety. I'll end with just a quick footnote to say that a co-occurring advocacy stream for St. Leonard's Canada is very closely tied to housing and homelessness. I know Arthur touched on that earlier. We see it inextricably linked to health and mental health care, and are trying to close the gap on having these not really having those conversations in isolation, which makes the work that so many of us are doing far less fruitful. So that's generally the lens that I'm going to be bringing to the conversation today, and I will leave the specific expertise on TBI and those operational challenges to my very esteemed co-panelists today. So thank you.
Thank you, Anita. I think I saw a common theme there around discharge planning and continuity of care around health services when I heard Linda and Anita speaking. So now I'm going to turn it over to Patricia from her perspective, what she sees as challenges and strategies. Patricia. Do we still have Patricia?
I do not see her present in the room. Here she comes back. She's relogging in. She will be with us momentarily.
Okay.
Patricia, just so you know, you're up at this time. Hopefully you're able to log in. I can see that you're trying.
I wonder if we should go with, over to Mary at this point in time.
Sure.
And then come back to Patricia. Mary, would you mind stepping in?
Sure, no problem. Good afternoon, everybody.
Is everyone able to hear me?
Oh.
Patricia, we're just going to slide over to Mary and then come right back to you.
Okay.
Go ahead, Mary.
No problem. Good afternoon, everybody. I belong to
Hi,
a group
is everybody able to hear me?
Patricia, can you hear us? I wonder if we need to send a note to Patricia.
I have done so, and I will.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Could you please let her know that Mary is going to speak next and that we'll come back to her?
Yes, absolutely. That is what we have done.
Thank you. Go ahead, Mary.
Okay. Technology, gotta love it. Our group is a sort of informal support group for women. That would be mothers, aunts, sisters, spouses of people who are incarcerated. We are founded by two desperate women about 10 years ago. who found each other at a detention center and realized that there really was nowhere to reach out and get information and support. So essentially, we provide non-legal advice and moral support and emotional support. We meet virtually once a month, and we have members, about 100 members from across Canada. And quite a few of our members have had to be sureties for their children. And that's because often family are the only people who are willing to do the job. And so there is a lot of pressure to do it, and there's a lot of challenges in doing that. I recently spent 5 months essentially being a prison guard for my own son while he was awaiting trial. And that is part of the big problem. The wait times for having your day in court do take a long time. And a lot of our members are very reluctant to leave their loved ones languishing in prison for months at a time. So in any case, in my case, my son was completely exonerated. So I saved him 5 months of hanging in jail. But the toll on us was very hard, very difficult. A lot of our members say parents really shouldn't be sureties for their children because the dynamic of being a pseudo prison guard for your kid is really, really difficult. So we are advocating for more support, more bail beds, as it were, to sort of spare families from having to take on this burden. You know, we've heard about the difficulties with connecting people with mental health services once they're in or out. That's the kind of thing that we really think is important. And in terms of TBI, many of our moms suspect that their child may have had a brain injury of some description, but there's no real way to find out, no screening, no support in sorting that around. So that's something I would like to you know, that's why we're interested in the work that Flora and Arthur are doing, because those numbers seem very significant. In my case, I suspect my son, who had a hockey career, you know, high-level hockey career, had several concussions, was a boxer. I'm wondering how much a brain injury might be a part of his ongoing problem with the justice system. So I'm here as somebody who's lived with trying to support someone in jail. I'm here to tell you that mothers worry about their children in jail. Terrible things do happen to people in jail. Several of our members have lost their children to violence at their own hand or at the hand of someone else in jail. So it's a real live concern for trying to save and spare your children unnecessary time in the justice system. So that's our perspective from moms.
Mary,
I
thank
think
you so much. Sorry.
Nope, that's it. I was going to say, I think I'm maybe close to my 5 minutes, but thanks.
Thank you for sharing that. Really appreciate it. I know that's always it's always tough to share those stories. So I do appreciate it. And thank you for sharing your perspective on TBI, and that there isn't enough screening being done, and that we aren't really focusing on that perspective and that issue within the criminal justice system. And that's what we're trying to shed light on today, and in the work that we all do together. So I appreciate that very much. Thank you. I'm not sure if Patricia, we can hear you now. Maybe we can try and see if we can hear you now.
Yes, hi, thank you. I want to apologize to everybody. We're having a very difficult time. One of the biggest concerns is the lack of funding in the criminal justice system. And our really old dinosaur computers are certainly a really great example of that. So it keeps crashing. But thank you all. I'll try and make it quick because I'm sure that nobody wants to look at a blank screen and my camera's not working. But I did want to say that I have been working in the criminal justice system for over 34 years. And I can tell you that drug addiction right now is worse than it's ever been. Homelessness is worse than it's ever been. The prevalence of brain injury in this population is just incredibly high. And the very sad part is that our clients are becoming more and more complex, and yet the system is becoming harder and harder to navigate. So individuals that have such a difficult time with, following through on direction and being able to communicate are now having to navigate a system that is more and more difficult. You know, the remote world, they certainly do not do very well in. There's an awful lot of confusion and chaos, it seems, especially amongst the population with the brain injury. So those are certainly challenges. Another challenge is that people are being released after hours when there isn't sort of a warm handoff or someone to go through things with them, and be able to communicate with them the way that they need. There is quite a collaboration with different mental health agencies, CMHA, CODA, Fred Victor, the bail program, Duty Council, Salvation Army, John Howard Society. And what we've done is we've put together sort of this thing called a client care room where, we've got maps so that people can have maps to get to where they're going, and also some warm clothing and transportation. So important. And I just really wanted to say that, the prevalence of people with brain injury in the criminal justice system is so incredibly high. The best thing that we can do is just sort of really learn on how to best communicate with these individuals with challenges. We're fortunate that there's a lot of really great initiatives, the Compassionate Justice Fund. There's the launch of the TBI Youth Justice Network, the Catch-22 study. There's wonderful tools, the Ontario Brain Injury Association, the Brain Injury Society of Toronto. Just if people could just sort of make the time to go through that and take a look at the tools and learn about how to adapt our communication, so that we could better communicate with individuals that struggle with memory, organization, and planning. We got to keep it simple. We've got to, pause. We've got to repeat. We've got to use tools like calendars and write things down for individuals, and just really understand that when somebody appears to not follow through, it's not because they want to be non-compliant, but rather they just have a really limited capacity to comply. Thank you.
Thank you, Patricia. I really appreciate that. And I'm glad we got your volume back. All right. We're going to move over to Veronica now. Veronica.
Thanks, Flora. Good afternoon, everyone. So as part of my role as an ABI system navigator, I was the co-chair of the Hamilton HSJCC pilot project called the ABI Corrections Working Group. This was a group of individuals, mostly service providers from the health, justice, and social sectors. And basically our purpose was to develop care and support plans for individuals that were being released from the Hamilton Wentworth Detention Center, who had been identified or were suspected of having an acquired brain injury. So it's kind of very similar to what the community reintegration officers are doing now. So one of the first challenges that we found was initially, before we started the pilot project, we asked the Hamilton Wentworth Detention Center how many inmates they had that had acquired brain injury, and they suspected around 15 to 17%. And that was usually by self-reporting. After we started the pilot project, that jumped up to 82%. And so we knew at the beginning there was a lack of identification of the individuals who had a brain injury. So our first job was to identify a screening tool. And we settled on the TBI screening, the HELPS TBI screening tool. It was a very simple tool, only 5 questions, yes or no, but it was enough to flag the staff as well as the probation officer and everyone else that this individual has a very good possibility of having experienced a brain injury. At that point, the Hamilton Wentworth Detention Center decided to make that part of the intake that was being done by the social worker and the nurse that sat on our committee. And the reason that became so important was because that's how you got to our working group, and that's how you got the help that they needed upon release. So what we also had as part of our group was we had a caseworker or a case manager that was from our community provider, our community ABI provider at the time. And that case manager, their supports and services were initiated as soon as the HELPS TBI screener was done, and if it flagged positive. And she would maintain contact with that individual during their sentence. But more importantly, as soon as they were released from custody, she was there to make sure that they had what they needed to be able to follow through with the plan that was developed. So she would initially have a meeting with the individual, and they would identify goals and needs. And then she would bring that information to the committee table, and we as a group would problem solve in making sure that this individual's unique needs were all being met by whoever was at the table. So then once that individual was released, then that case manager was able to assist that individual with any of the plans and the needs that were required. But in particular, one of the biggest challenges and one of the outcomes we really wanted to keep an eye on was recidivism rates of these individuals. So again, we did find that our ABIs had higher recidivism rates than those without TBI. So what we did was we tracked that. And one of the ways that we addressed it, because again, you've heard over and over that following conditions of any kind of bail or community conditions was that there's a lot of cognitive issues, there's behavioral issues. So we really wanted to make sure that they were supported whenever they were given any of those conditions. So she made sure that she followed up with them as they went through. So she would assist them in making sure that they got to their probation or parole, whatever their appointments were. She would participate, she would sit with them, she would follow up with them to make sure they understood. Then after they left the office, she would follow up with them through the week to make sure that they understood and were following their bail, their conditions. So she would also provide education and support to the staff, be it the probation or parole officer, or whoever she was working with, to help them better understand this individual and the issues that they had. So that was one of the biggest challenges we had, was we did see decreases in recidivism rates in those individuals that we were able to support. So that was one positive outcome, that we were able to make some good change with this difficult population. Thank you.
Thanks, Veronica. So there is hope. There is hope. There are ways to do this, to help people with traumatic brain injury and acquired brain injury, so that they don't cycle back into the system. So I think that is something that we need to be thinking about in terms of models of care. So that's great. All right, so we're going to turn it over to Connie now.
Okay, thank you. And I'm just going to build on what Veronica described, and I'm going to talk about some of the challenges that I see in people, and then give a little bit of a case study, a short one, and then hopefully give a couple of strategies that people can kind of take away and say, this is something that I could actually use the next time I'm talking to someone that I know has a brain injury. So I think some of the things that I see are people having challenges with information processing. So if you can imagine, when they go into court, it's very quick language, and often is a different language than we're used to speaking. It's legal language, right? And so it's hard for people to understand and to process that information. Often they're tasked with doing things that nobody writes down for them, so they're just verbally tasked. And it's because of their memory impairments, they leave the courthouse or that room not being sure what they need to do next. So automatically they're kind of behind in what they have to do. And this similarly follows them through the situation as they go into prison, and then they're released. When they're released, they might be handed some papers and, you know, all your instructions are on there. If they have trouble attending to information and reading the documents and processing that information and remembering it, then it's going to end up being problematic for them down the road. And so I'm going to describe a gentleman that I had contact with recently, started about 1.5 years ago. And he's in his late 20s now. He was hit by a car as a pedestrian when he was about 4 years old. And he was in a coma for a while. And, you know, the challenge with children is that there's a phrase that they grow into their injuries. So, you know, he came out of the coma, he seemed to be doing well, but he was 4 years old. So the cognitive load on him was limited. You know, he didn't have to do extensive math problems. He didn't have to keep track of a schedule. He didn't have to remember things because other people were doing it for him. And as children grow into their injury, you start to see that gap widen between what they're capable of doing and what their peers at that developmental age are doing. And so, you know, a few years down the road, his parents started to notice things. You know, and as I look back in the medical records, you could see that there were challenges, but nobody attributed it to that severe brain injury because everybody said, oh, that was a long time ago. And I think that's one thing that people need to keep in mind. And, you know, I think it speaks to what Mary said is that, you know, people can have a brain injury quite some time ago and it's a chronic condition, so it affects them long term. And so this young gentleman started to have more behaviors. And as the gap widened between his abilities versus the expectations, it became harder and harder for him to meet those things. And so there was more behaviors. And over time, he became involved with the court system and was in and out of prison. And when I met him, he was in his late 20s. He was so excited to finish school. And so on the day he was discharged, he was referred to me. And I immediately put him on the wait list for a number of different services in the community. And, you know, he talked to me with excitement about what was going to happen next in his life. And unfortunately, he forgot to call someone significant that he was to call. It was part of his release requirements. And because of that, he went back to prison. And so then he came off the wait list and went where he wasn't going to get any assistance. There was no help in prison for him. About 2 months ago, he called me again. He said, I'm in the community again. Can you put me back on the wait list? So he is now on the wait list. But I guess my point is, you know, this young gentleman has been in and out of prison and unfortunately has never received the help he really needs. And he wants to have a future with finishing school and going on to work, but it's just been elusive to him. And so I'm just going to give you a couple of concrete ideas that hopefully you can use with any of your individuals you're working with, but particularly those with a brain injury. And that is, you know, when there's any documents, if you can approach it from a multimodal perspective. So by that, I mean, you know, have them read it with them. I would suggest highlighting the significant parts in a different color so that it jumps out at them. Maybe getting them to actually print down some of the things. So if there's a phone number, get them to print it down because it's another way that they're processing the information. And then another way is to ask them, describe to me what we talked about, because we know that if you say to someone, probably anybody, did you get that? You'll always get the answer, yes, I got that. Whereas if you say to them, tell me what we talked about, then you'll really be able to see the gaps in their knowledge and be able to fill it in. So hopefully you won't have the problems where they forget to call or they don't know who to call. That can all be addressed. I hope that's helpful.
Connie, thanks so much. Very practical tips to help people. And I keep thinking about, you know, how do we do more in the healthcare system to help people before they actually make that pathway into the criminal justice system. So really appreciate the practical tips. And I've been thinking for years about how do we make sure that people stay in the health system and in the community rather than making, as I say, that trip into the criminal justice system. So thank you very much. And our last speaker, our last panelist today is Katie. Katie.
Well, can you hear me?
Yes.
Good. Okay. Really echoing what everybody else said, particularly Patricia, who was my colleague working at the bail program when I was in probation and parole. One of the things I was asked to do was give a little historical context. I started in 1985 and I retired in 2022. And I would say in the course of the 37 years, I saw probation and parole and community supervision clients go from being less complex. They had fewer needs and fewer demands on their cognitive capacity, and to being much more complex over the years. So what I saw, I started referring, sorry, horn in the background. I started seeing clients who I referred to them as the trifecta of issues. They had profound mental health / TBI, ABI, developmental disability, multiple cognitive and emotional challenges. That was sort of one cluster. Substance use, polysubstance use, and homelessness. And that those three put together were catastrophic for a lot of the individuals I supervised, because it was very difficult to help them navigate the system. So the complexity of those clients increased dramatically over the years. I worked in Moss Park in Toronto, at Parliament in Dundas. I had a predominantly what we called a mental health caseload, very, very complex, very, very challenging clients in terms of their needs and their repeated travels through the criminal justice system, most of the time for what we call administrative breaches. So clients would be placed on, for example, a probation order with many, many conditions with which they were to comply, and they understood almost none of them. And as was pointed out by Connie and some of the other speakers as well, they're told these things in court, they nod their head, they say yes because they just want to get it over with, and then they leave the courtroom understanding virtually nothing about what's transpired and what they've actually just agreed is an obligation for them, a legal obligation. Those clients in particular, the TBI clients, have a real problem with anything that's abstract. So if the judge said you have a boundary restriction and you're not to be, Dundas to the north and Richmond to the south and Yonge Street to the west, and Bond Street over to the east, that kind of thing, that was completely meaningless for clients. They're to stay out of a specific area, so they didn't understand it. So they'd hang out in that area and they would get picked up for failing to comply by the police, and not understanding that they in fact breached their condition. So what I started doing to try to make some of these conditions more concrete, and as Connie pointed out as well, was I would produce what was called a one sheet. It was just something that I typed up. It had a map. I sort of just copied and pasted a map of the area from the internet, plunked it into the document. I had the conditions typed out on this piece of paper. Their name was not at the top. There was no way of knowing to whom that document belonged, because of course our clients lose their documents all the time. So if it fell out of their pocket on the street, nobody knew who they were. And every single time they came in to see me, which was never when they were supposed to, and I was very flexible about clients. I just wanted them to come in and see me. I just wanted to sort of proof of life that they were still alive and kicking. I would provide them with an updated version of what I called a one sheet. So it was a Word document. It wasn't fancy. It wasn't very technological, but it was my way of trying to keep them updated on court appointments, medical appointments, important contacts in the community, phone numbers, things of that nature. And what I would do is go over that information with them to make sure that they understood. Anybody who's ever talked to me knows that I talk fast and I tend to ask multiple questions at once. It's one of my flaws as a probation and parole officer. And one of the things I had to learn was to ask clients questions one at a time, not saying things like, oh, so you were in court and you got these conditions, and where are you living now? The run-on sentence, not helpful. Clients could not process that. I learned very quickly, and I had to slow it down and break it down into tiny pieces and spend a lot more time talking to the clients. It takes more time to deal with clients with TBI and other complex vulnerabilities, but it's worth the effort that we put into them, and it's worth the effort of producing a new document every single time. It's one of the things we've talked about on this project is coming up with some sort of template or some sort of app or something so that clients have access instantaneously to that information as it changes, because of course, as we know, the justice system is a very dynamic place. That's all I have to say.
Thank you, Katie. Nice kind of end point there for us with the summary of kind of what some of the complex needs are. Really appreciate the panelists. Really kind of not a cacophony, but a kind of a overview of all of the different things that are challenges across the system, and really appreciate all of the insights that all of you have, very much so. I know I need to send it over to the moderators for the Q&A, but is there anything burning that any of the panelists want to add before we send it over for Q&A? Anything that you want to add to the conversation just before we do that? Going once, going twice. All right, moderators, please take it over for the
Absolutely.
Q&A, please. Thank you.
Absolutely. No problem. So actually, there's been the chat has been pretty active. Thank you, Anita and Mary, for your questions and answers. I don't see anything else. I actually am learning a lot as I'm sitting here listening to you guys, and I don't know a lot about this stuff, but there's so much valuable information here. My question is, where is there anywhere that this is collated? Is there any one kind of stop access kind of place that we could go? I don't know who, I don't even know who would answer that question, but I'm just wondering for my own, edification.
You recorded this, right?
Yes.
There you go. You have it.
That's it. That's the answer. Okay.
So what exactly are you looking for? Like, I think all of these insights come from, people working in the field, and from research. And so I don't know if you would find it in any single one document. I don't know if the rest of the panelists, I think it comes from it would come from different pieces and different reports and different,
Right.
I think you might have to sit down with people and talk to them. I don't know if other people have, go ahead,
However,
Arthur.
we have developed a handy, fairly extensive resource list, which covers some, not all of the ground we've covered today, but quite a bit. And it's a very nice introduction into the community-based supports. I believe Madison just shared the link in the chat. It is also going to be included. The link is on the last slide. So we'll be up with the presentation.
Yes.
Oh,
Yep.
great. There is a question from Mary Crawford. Susan would like to know where you are located and basically probably where and how can we refer to your group?
Yeah, we are sort of organized out of Ottawa, Ontario, but people from across the country have found us and join us. There's no fees, there's no membership, anything. There is a website. If you do momsottawa.com, you should be able to find us, and you can make a request to join us. Our intrepid Marge will add you to our email list and invite you to our monthly meetings. They're held at 6 o'clock on the first Thursday of every month. We used to get together and meet in person before COVID, but because we've got all these people from across the country, it's worked out really well that we just do it by Zoom. Some nights it goes on and on and on. A lot of people want to talk. Other nights it's not so busy, but essentially it's like an AA meeting. It's very confidential, and it's just women sharing their experience, their advice, their feelings, and it's really a rewarding way to connect with people who are, can understand what you're going through. So it's momsottawa.com.
Yes, we've put the link in the chat. Thank you so much, Mary.
Great. Yeah.
There was a question from Lindsay to, I think, everyone. Does your work involve any trainings for the police, not just the screening form, but everything else that was discussed? I don't know who wants to tackle that one.
I will. So the answer is yes. For the most part, we do try to provide education to each of our kind of local police services. Sometimes it's with quite a bit of success, and other times it's not much interest. But we certainly, as navigators, that is one of our roles, is to, and as well as just not just the police, any first responders. So we are certainly trying to do as much education and training for those individuals, but there hasn't been anything formal set in place for the police at this point in time. But certainly there are some that are very open and willing to learn about things. So we're constantly trying to get in touch with our local police services.
Awesome. Thank you, Veronica. Mary, another question for you. For the moms of Ottawa, do their loved ones have to be incarcerated, or are legal matters sufficient?
I was just typing an answer. Can you hear me?
Yes, we
Yes.
can hear you.
Okay, no, they do not have to be currently incarcerated. People who are involved with the justice system are fine. Many of our moms have come out the other side. They have grown-up children who've become very successful. But they still come and provide their support. So yeah, I would definitely just reach out on the website, and I'm sure you can join us if you like.
Thank you so much, Mary.
Mhm.
I don't see any other questions coming in. Does anyone have any more information they would like to add to what we've been discussing?
It's Katie here. If I could just jump in, I've been retired for years, so I'm a little out of the corrections loop. But just a question for Linda, who my colleague at corrections, who is absolutely amazing. I don't know how she does her job, quite frankly. One of the things we often complained about on the community side and about the institution side was that we didn't have a screening tool for individuals to determine brain injury. We often suspected it all the time, in fact, but there had been no sort of movement afoot to do any kind of screening. Has that changed, Linda, at all in corrections?
Yeah, thanks, Katie, for that question. As I said at the beginning, we are implementing an electronic medical record, and we will, launch that early in the new year and expand it over a year until it's fully implemented. It's a phased approach. In that particular electronic medical record, there is a helps tool that will allow for screening. So that will be a learning curve for people who are looking after people in custody. We've built in a number of really important screening tools based on the prevalence of conditions, health conditions. As you know, we at this point in time screen fairly robustly and for mental health issues, but the traumatic brain injury and brain injuries in general are also a really important factor. So that's something that is built into the tool, and we're working towards implementing adoption.
Thank you.
Thank you. There's a question here for you, Katie. I often have clients that just pop in as scheduled appointments aren't always doable. My program is voluntary and sometimes can be difficult to motivate clients to come in for support. Do you have any tips and or suggestions? And then she says anyone can speak to this.
Yeah, I mean, the one advantage of working in a coercive system is that if clients didn't come in, they knew they could be charged, which is terrible, to be dangling that over someone's head. But for voluntary programs, if the person's currently being supervised on a probation order, a conditional sentence, or even a parole certificate, I would, if you can, work with the probation officer I would say to the client that if they go to your program, if the probation officer agrees to this, that it's a form of reporting. So it's a sort of way of it's incentivizing them attending a program, because the client gets credit for going to the program. We're talking to the counselor, working with that individual in the community. And that actually does reduce their risk. We know this, that if they're involved with community supports and they're attending them, it reduces their risk. So no need for them to report as often. So I would suggest, if possible, if the person's currently being supervised, working with the corrections employee on the other end, the probation and parole officer.
And if I could add on to Katie's response, focusing on the what's in it for me or what's in it for them is really a great motivator as well. People need to see the benefits to themselves. So really understanding what's important to your, I was going to say patient, because I think in healthcare terms, to the person, and then moving it towards what's in it for them. And I think the other thing that's really important is be patient, because changing lifelong patterns of behavior takes time. So what's in it for them provides motivation, good reinforcement, positive reinforcement when people, contribute positively, and being patient when things don't go perfectly, I think is really important.
Thank you, ladies. We do have another question. Mary's asking, actually, if there's any peer support programs or pilots to have peers working together.
So is that a question for?
I'm not sure who it's for.
Okay, so I know that there is work underway for peer support program, and I believe it's for the community arm of corrections. So that would be the probation and parole area. That program is not fully implemented. It's really in its infancy, but that is a really, really great source for people who are experiencing similar things in life, to have that support. I can't speak to where they're at specifically with that program, but I know it is certainly conceptualized, and work is underway.
And
Linda.
Sorry, John Howard Society has used peers in their programs as well, engaged them as well. I know with their mobile trailer service, they have peers. I'm not sure what they're doing with that service at the moment, but I know that peer support is a big piece of their programming. Also, Elizabeth Fry may do that as well. I'm not quite sure with their program at the moment what they're doing, but there are two agencies that do work with peers. I just want to say a piece about the resources. I realize the full link is not here. It's in the chat. It's on the website at Unity Health. It is a very comprehensive list of resources for TBI. It has almost everything you would need, including screeners. It's a great resource. Pretty much everybody on the panel has contributed to it, so please check it out. I think it'll have almost everything you would need. We're really happy that we were able to put it together, so please do check it out.
Okay, a couple more questions. We're going to wrap it up shortly. Does TSDC use TBI toolkit assessment during admission? I'm not sure what TSDC is.
Yeah, Toronto South Detention Center. No, they are not currently using the tool, or healthcare is not currently using the tool at admission at this time. But I know there has been discussion historically about that, and certainly looking forward to the future when we can implement that on a provincial scale.
Okay, and one last question. How does peer support work when a condition might be to stay away from people who have a criminal background?
I can answer that.
Thanks, Katie.
Lindsay's saying call the lawyer and have the condition removed. Yeah, there's that. You can have a condition varied under the criminal code. It's very relatively straightforward. The probation parole officers, one of our roles is to apply for a variation, and we can have it ask for it to be removed or to be varied to allow for that individual or other individuals to be on the order, and that if they get found with them by the police, they don't get charged with an administrative breach.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So I think that's going to wrap us up for today. I would just like to thank all of you, all the panelists and speakers, for these amazing presentations and for sharing your knowledge with us. For those of us participating and present here, we would ask that you take a few moments to complete the evaluation. The link is found at the bottom of the session page if you go to the session website. Thank you to everyone for your participation and insightful questions. There will be something going on in the plenary room for the day 2 closing remarks. I'm not sure what time that's at. And I would just like to remind everybody that the sessions have been recorded and will be available on the platform for you to watch at your leisure for the next 3 months. Thank you all so much. That ends our session for today. Have a wonderful afternoon.
Thanks, Tanya.
Thank you.
Bye.
Tanya. Thanks, Sudha.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.